so lovely to see you. Thank you all so much for coming out. If we haven't met yet, my name is Grace. I'm our programs coordinator here at BMSC, which means I spend a lot of my time doing field trip stuff for students who come here on field trip. And I also get to do like all the fun events at BMSC, including our Summer Seminar Series. Thank you so much. Tonight we have a fabulous talk from Dr. Garrard on all kinds of just amazing things to do with our fabulous killer whales. Very specific to, very relevant to us here in Banfield. Every once in a while we see a couple peeking out, fingers crossed, maybe we'll get a surprise sighting before the end of the course. But without further ado, we're so happy you're here and thank you so much for being here. Please welcome our speaker.
Thanks everyone for coming to the seminar. I really appreciate you coming out. My collaborator for the University of Exeter, Darren Croft, who's a behavioural ecologist, happens to be arriving here but tomorrow. So I will have to kind of explain things in his absence. And what I'm going to try to convey is, I will say from the outset, I'm not going to give a straight answer to the question of what do killer whales want. And I'm also going to be, I think, explaining the sense in which it's probably impossible to know what killer whales want without also thinking about the way we represent and talk about killer whales as humans. Those two things are intrinsically related in a way that might be disappointing to scientists in some way, but I think can also be quite productive. So those are dolphins. They're a statue from the city of Kelowna, where I work at UBC Okanagan on unceded Syilx territory, 500 kilometers at least from the nearest cetaceans. So if nothing else, I think that tells us just how fascinated we are by cetaceans. And it's important to say, and much of what I'm going to be talking about is about how that fascination came about, because it wasn't a given by any means. Certainly in the case of killer whales, going into the 1960s, killer whales on this coastline and pretty much everywhere around the world where people interacted with them in some way, they were seen as monsters. That, if you'd asked what do killer whales want, people would have said, oh, it's easy, they want blood. Right? They want to kill things, they want to kill their prey, but they'll probably kill people, and they'll probably kill anything that gets in the water. So that was the status quo, culturally speaking, in the 1960s. And then a remarkable accident occurred. So 1964, Vancouver Aquarium wanted a statue of a killer whale for outside the aquarium. So as you would, they asked some fishermen, they said, could you go and kill a killer whale so that we can drag it back and give it to the sculptor as a model for their sculpture. So they went off and they shot a killer whale, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, it didn't die straight away. And contrary to what they had expected, it also was not immediately set upon by the other killer whales and chopped up. Instead, what they saw was the injured killer whale being lifted up by the others to try and help it, to try and rescue it. And at that point, they thought, actually, I don't think we can shoot it again. And so instead, they put a net around it, and they took it back to Vancouver. And they put it in a dry dock. And then, of course, they named it Moby Doll, because they thought it was a girl, and because anything associated with whales has to be called Moby something. Because of Herman Melville and Moby Dick. So Moby Doll was in Vancouver Harbour for several months, unfortunately in brackish, not salt water. They were trying to feed her all kinds of things that she didn't want to eat because they knew nothing at all about killer whales at this point. But what people saw was that these didn't seem to be the monsters of popular conception. So I'm not going to retell this whole story. My co-investigator, Jason Colby from University of Victoria, wrote a fantastic book called Orca, How the World Came to Know and Love the World's Greatest Predator. That's this whole story. So I'm not going to repeat all of that. Jason tells the story of how, in effect, that accidental discovery, and then what came soon after it, which was intentional capture of killer whales and putting them in tanks and training them, which was, again, just an astonishing thing to do. A guy called Ted Griffin was the first to do it. He had fishermen get hold of a young killer whale for him, and he got in a swimming pool with it. And everyone just assumed he was going to get eaten. But he didn't get eaten. And the killer whale that he named Namu, he found that the killer whale was trainable, so he trained it. And these killer whale displays undoubtedly endeared killer whales to us far more than they had in the past. So I'm actually going to start somewhere along in this story, partly because I think it's a hilarious and ridiculous movie. It's called Orca, with an exclamation mark. It's from 1977, so it's at the point at which killer whales are becoming a great deal more popular, but the sort of public attitudes towards whales in general are still in a kind of state of flux. So this is just around the time Greenpeace, which is also a Canadian organization, switched from anti-nuclear activism to saving the whale. And that phrase and that idea emerges in the late 70s, and this is part of it's during this time. The other thing that had just happened is 1976 was Jaws. The surprise popularity of Jaws, the immense popularity of Jaws, and the director Dino De Laurentiis had literally said to his production crew, is like, what's better than a great white shark? And they were like, killer whale? Okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to make a movie about a killer whale, and it's going to be better than Jaws. Well, it may or may not be better than Jaws. It certainly didn't do anywhere near as well as Jaws. But, and in many ways, it is an absolutely ridiculous movie. A fisherman is hired to capture a killer whale. He goes wrong, he kills her, and then the male who sees his mate being killed then sets out for revenge. And the movie is basically about the male killer whale's revenge for the killing of his mate, which includes, like, dragging houses into the water and at one point, he sinks a fishing vessel by pushing an iceberg at it, smashing a great hole in it. So, yeah, all pretty ridiculous. See whether you think this is ridiculous. So this is the scene from just after the female killer whale has been killed and then has been dropped back into the water, and this is where the male comes to, I guess, collect her body. And that's going to work. Not great how that happens. Might need to go back.
The button on the bottom right.
Yeah, normally it is that, but this is an embedded video.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, I might have to just show it to you here. Oh, may not. Oh, curses. You know what? Try everyone. I would just say, I think the vocalizations are humpbacks. I know for sure that in another scene where a supposed scientist is talking about them, she uses humpback whale recordings. So, but these may be orcas. I don't think they are. So now we've got sound and no visuals. Okay, it's not actually supposed to be completely dark. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks, PowerPoint. I will just try to show it to you because it is, I think, worth it. Okay. Yeah, you get a heck of a lot of very strange things. There's the killer whale destroying a house. Hang on, we have the funeral. Revenge. Okay, no, can't do it, sorry. Okay, what happens in the scene, which I will describe to you, is that oh, is it going to show it there? Yes, it is. Okay, that would be a bit weird, but pushing the body of the female to the beach, surrounded by other killer whales in a mournful manner. Special effects are not awesome on this one. The music is good. Right. So what do you think about that? What is it? Is it ridiculous? Is it, dare I say, anthropomorphic? Yes? Why? This is what we do in our classes, by the way. That's pretty much what we do all day long. Why?
Are you actually asking?
Yeah, go on. No, why not?
I wasn't sad. I was kind of. I mean, if it was a real orca, I would be sad, but I could kind of tell it wasn't. So.
Oh, okay. So it's because it's very obviously a plastic toy.
Yes.
Okay, that's what Rose said. Okay. You know, what's interesting about this is that at the time when this movie was made, firstly, Dino De Laurentiis had no knowledge of killer whales and doesn't seem to have asked anyone that did. And this scene plays an important part in the plot, but as far as he knew at the time, it had no scientific basis whatsoever. And you know, the way it's presented and the music and everything, it does make it kind of seem a bit ridiculous, and especially when you look at the other things that happen in the movie, it's really quite ridiculous. And yet, there's an episode which I'm sure many of you know about from relating to the southern resident killer whale population, in which a killer whale, J35, also known as Telequa, carried her dead calf on her head, on her snout, for, what was it, 7 weeks? 2 weeks. For 2 weeks. Does anybody remember this? Yeah? How was it understood? How was it presented? Yeah.
Well, frankly, you could have played the same music over a lot of the coverage.
Yes, you could. That's right. Why?
Because, well, you're looking at an animal that is behaving in a way that's very easy to interpret as the grief of a parent.
Yeah.
And I think that many people, just speaking to your concept of anthropomorphizing,
Yeah.
will see that and they think of their own parents or their parent.
That's right, exactly. And that is exactly how it was interpreted in the media. Scientists, of course, were cautious. They were like, yeah, well, it kind of looks like that, maybe. That scene plays a very important role in a documentary that was made in this region called Co-Extinction by Canadian directors. And in the movie, they have a montage of exactly this sequence, and they say that the voiceover says, scientists believe J35 was in a deep grieving process. Of course, scientists may well have believed that, but they sure as heck didn't write that in any of their publications. Mm-hmm. What they wrote in their publications is that they might see this as what they call epimeletic behaviour, as possibly related to grieving, and which is exactly you say. There is that anxiety, that caution, to say no more, about projecting human emotions onto animals, and we all know that that's a terrible thing to do. The question is that I want to just briefly explain is like, why do we think that's a terrible thing to do? How did we come to think that? And it actually started out as a concern about the way people represent God. So, as you can see here from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's painting, In this, God is a white man with a beard. And hundreds of years ago, there were philosophers who were already saying, like, really, come on, this is, I mean, nice painting, but this is the creator of the universe. You can't, like, you're obviously projecting human characteristics onto the divine. And that's a mistake, that's an error. So actually, the worry about anthropomorphism first came in relation to people's representations of God. One of my favorite judgments on it was from the Dutch philosopher Benedict Spinoza. And Spinoza says that since he, that is like man, since man never heard anything about the mind of these divine rulers, each man was compelled to judge it from his own, and hence he affirmed that the gods direct everything for his advantage. This is the reason why each man has devised for himself, out of his own brain, a different mode of worshipping God, so that God might love him above others and direct all nature to the service of his blind cupidity and insatiable avarice. You might want to know what cupidity and avarice are. Cupidity is self-centeredness, self-love, and of course avarice is greed. For Spinoza, representing God as a person, and a person that's going to be nice to you and do things that are good for you, is the most pathetic form of childishness. And he wrote that in 1677, never a truer word. By 1757, David Hume, a philosopher, Scottish philosopher, said there is a universal tendency among mankind to conceive all beings like themselves. It's just something we tend to do. We just tend to project our own minds, mental systems, and capabilities onto other things. Not just animals, not just gods, cars, laptops, pretty much anything we can anthropomorphize. It first gets applied to animals in 1894 in a very important early textbook of comparative psychology. In no case may we interpret an action as the outcome of the exercise of a higher psychical faculty if it can be interpreted as the outcome of the exercise of one which stands lower in the psychological scale. And this is Marlowe, principle of parsimony. Right? So parsimony is that kind of deeply embedded, but actually fundamentally unjustified scientific belief that if you can explain something simply, you shouldn't introduce a load of unnecessary complexity. There's actually no way of proving that parsimony is a good principle, but scientists are all very, very sure that it is. And so from there on, really for most of the 20th century, anthropomorphism is no longer about whether God loves us or God has a beard. It's about whether animals, other than ourselves, are capable of a whole range of different kinds of mental states, behaviours, and so forth. One of the things that's super interesting about this, though, is that Darwinism depends on the recognition, among other things, depends on the recognition of a whole load of homologies between our physical bodies, right? So it's clear, like physiological homologies are basic to the idea of evolution and the tree of life and so on, and scientists didn't have any problem at all with physical homologies, but behavioural homologies, that's a very different matter. By the end of the 20th century, there were scientists and philosophers pushing back pretty hard on this use of the word anthropomorphism to, in effect, discipline and constrain the kinds of things we could say about animals. So the primatologist Franz de Waal argued that in the context of mammals with whom we are related, actually the parsimonious explanation is one that acknowledges behavioural homologies rather than one that denies them. So de Waal actually says there isn't just one risk here, anthropomorphism, there's another risk, anthropodenial, right? Denying that animal behaviours are meaningful, that animal behaviours are more than just the behaviour of a machine, as it were, that animals somehow function according to different behavioural principles to humans, when we know perfectly well that we are related to them, and so it's a reasonable bet that there will be behavioural homologies as well as physical ones. And by 2000, there's a philosopher and critic called Eileen Christ who makes a very powerful, strong claim that there exists no inventory of concepts or classes of concepts for which the categorical case could be made that they should never be applied to animals. In other words, whilst it may very much be true, and we talked about this in class, that, you know, the example of my colleague who used to pull the garbage out of the bin, and I thought he was guilty. Well, he didn't. We know because of scientists that dogs don't feel guilt, they're just scared, right? You can get the dog to display the same seeming emotion of guilt just by getting someone else to pull the garbage out. So it is for sure true that humans do project things onto animals, that we make mistakes, we get things wrong. But what Chris is saying is, this is not a categorical thing. It's not like any emotion or type of human behavior. There is nothing that could be categorically denied to animals, like as it were a priori. So let's test this. This is a terrible test. This is this is free willing. So let's see if we can gather from this short scene of free willing from 1993. What by 1993 did people think killer whales wanted?
Still beautiful. Oh, buddy. And I go. We'll stay in these crabs and fishes. Yes. What, you want to go with me? Oh, I can do that too. You do it the other arm? Yeah? You do it the other arm? Hey! Can you wave?
Okay, what do killer whales want?
They want to play and be loved. It's a new flipper phenomenon.
They do, and they want to be our friends.
They do.
They desperately want to be our friends. They also want to be free. So that's a bit complicated. And that turned out to be very complicated pretty much the day after Free Willy came out, because turns out Warner Brothers hadn't given this any thought at all. That they made this movie. At the end of the movie, there was like a phone line that said, like, if you want to help whales, call this number. And if you called the number, it was like, yeah, you can help stop hunting and baleen whales. But all the kids that saw Free Willy were like, is Willy free? It's actually free. Oh, can you free Willy then? Actually, right? They just hadn't seemed to even conceptualize that people noticed that whilst Willy leaps over, leaps to freedom at the end of the movie, Keiko, the killer whale that's playing Willy, was still in this pond, this exact pond in the center of Mexico City, and very, very sickly indeed. So that turned into a big public relations problem that then turned into a 10-year-long, multi-million-dollar strategy to free Keiko as well as free Willy. And that one of the things that interests me about this is that process and its outcome, in which eventually Keiko died in a Norwegian fjord on his own, but with humans around, is still very, very contentious. Some people think that it was a crazy waste of money, and other people think that it was a good example of how this whole process can work. And the fact that we cannot agree about it is precisely the point. Because what I'm going to suggest is that anthropomorphism is ultimately a question of language and culture, and it's not a problem that scientists can solve by themselves. Scientists can try to be cautious and rational and agnostic and design, come up with good methodological designs. That's fantastic. But the problem of anthropomorphism is larger than science. And the fate of Keiko is a great example of this. It's still one over which people can't agree. And there's a wonderful podcast from New York, I think it's from New York Times, or maybe This American Life. Anyway, it's called The Good Whale. And it tells the whole story with all the disputes included. It's wonderful. They really, they talk to all these different people about why, everyone thinks completely contrasting things. So we're in the 1990s, and by this point, it seems pretty obvious that what killer whales want is to be our friends, but they also want to be free, and they also want to show off in front of us. They love to perform, because still during the 90s and early noughties, you have very, very popular killer whale shows. One figure that I saw estimated that killer whale shows, SeaWorld and its ilk, had more spectators in a single year than all the organized sports on Earth put together. NFL, NHL, soccer, etc., SeaWorld beat them all. So this was a fantastically popular business model, and it was one that, at least in its early years, served a very profoundly important purpose in making people care about killer whales. They may have made them care about them in a very particular style in which they were made to enact behaviours that really had nothing to do with how they behave in the wild, but I think they were demonstrably beneficial. Still, there was I think it's fair that the anthropologist Arne Caland argues that, part of what happened with Shamu and the performances was that, in combination with the Greenpeace and Save the Whale and so on, we ended up with a kind of cultural conception of what he calls the super whale. That was really a kind of mishmash of lots of different things and had very little to do with any particular species. As you will know, there's about 90 species, of which 4 are very, very well known and heavily studied scientifically, and there are dozens, including various kinds of beaked whales, that are only known from type skeletons, so have never been observed in the wild. So, you have this vast biological diversity in the oceans, a far, far, far smaller set of organisms that have actually been looked at scientifically amongst killer whales. Overwhelmingly, the knowledge was about the southern resident population, which happens conveniently to live off Vancouver. And then you're down to these 4 species, which are, he says, conflated in the public mind. He says people think there's this whale that has the largest animal on Earth, it has the largest brain, might be as intelligent as human beings or more so, sings pleasant songs, is friendly, is endangered, and so on. It is a mythic creation, a super whale that has come to represent all species of cetaceans. I think there's probably a lot of truth in that. A later writer from cultural studies points out how this idealization of cetaceans leads them to become what he calls figures of excess, both melancholy and excess. He says it's not so much that whales are allegorized, rather they are obsessively allegorized. Not so much that they are anthropomorphized, but relentlessly anthropomorphized. For example, in terms of demonstrating the qualities, kindness, caring, and compassion we humans would like, but usually fail, to see in ourselves. This is true. Many of the books and movies that I've been looking at with killer whales will at some point say, if only humans could be as wonderfully cooperative as killer whales. I wish we could be so nice. It is fascinating how this idealization, which apparently the marine biologists call the sea panda version of killer whales, how the sea panda has come to kind of predominate in people's conceptions of killer whales, and in the marketing of this region. Everywhere you go in this region, you'll see an orca popping up, on a stuffy or a sign or what have you, right? They are routinely described as iconic, and I think there is that sort of sea panda idealization plays an important part in that. By the 70s, as I say, you had this the saving whale became really a kind of code of representation for environmentalism in general, right? Saving the whale equals environmentalism. And so cetaceans are not only figures of shame because of the mass slaughter that took place up until the 1980s, they're also, I think, figures of idealization, creatures that we look up to because we have this usually rather one-sided and narrow conception of what they're really like. And they're also powerfully symbolic. They're mobilized for representing regions, representing ideals, and so forth. All of this is going swimmingly, and then Blackfish happens. So this is a 2013 documentary. I'm just going to show you the trailer because it gives you a pretty good idea of what this documentary is about. How many people have seen Blackfish? Quick show of hands. Okay, quite a few of you. Oh, okay.
When you look into their eyes, you know somebody is home.
They're an animal that possesses great spiritual power, not to be meddled with.
We need a social response for a dead person in the world. A whale is one of the triggers.
Silicone was the one that went after her. Donna is the senior trainer here at Shenmue Stadium.
She captured what it means to be a SeaWorld trainer and made me realize what happened to her really could have happened to anyone.
I've been expecting somebody to be killed by a kilogram.
We weren't told much about it, other than it was trainer error. It didn't just happen. It's not a singular event. You have to go back to understand this.
These people herded them in. They could just pick out the young ones.
This is the worst thing that I've ever done.
When Silicon arrived at SeaWorld, he was twice as large as the next animal.
We stored these whales in what's called a module, which was 20 feet across and 30 feet deep.
That's in Victoria.
Probably led to what I think is a psychosis.
All whales in captivity are all psychologically traumatized. It's not just silicone.
If you were in a bathtub for 25 years, don't you think you'd get a little psychotic?
Donna would tell you that it was her mistake. They blamed her. It's just a bold-faced lie.
I was just instructed to get rid of the thing. The industry has a vested interest in spinning these and sells a lot of shampoo dolls and sells a lot of tickets at the gate.
There's no record of an orca doing any harm in the wild.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say that Blackfish completely demolished the Shamu myth. I think it also demolished that sense that people came away from Free Willy with, that killer whales really, really wanted to be our friends. Apart from that, it's really not that interested in what killer whales want, actually. If you kind of watch the movie critically, you'll see that what the movie really wants to do is unmask SeaWorld. It's a conspiracy documentary that is primarily aimed at the profit-making motive of SeaWorld and has no particular interest in the psychology of killer whales. As you can see by this, Ken Balcom was a great orca researcher. Our collaboration is with the Center for Whale Research on San Juan Island, and Ken Balcom founded that and established a 50, 60-year archive of killer whale observations that's absolutely invaluable. But the idea that you can say that Tilikum was psychotic, or basically they don't have anybody in the documentary who has any particular expertise in animal psychology. David Doofus, who's shown there, is a geographer whose expertise is in grey whale tracking. I'm not trying to, actually, I am more than happy if captive killer whales are never seen again. But the documentary, as I say, is not all that interested in killer whale psychology, to say the least. But what is interesting about that to me is that it has landed us in a place, I think, where the previously existing idealizations and representations of killer whales are kind of in pieces. And we're seeing and learning new things about killer whales all the time that don't fit with the kind of sea panda version. But at the same time, I don't think there's any kind of readily available and acceptable and coherent conception of really how we should be thinking about killer whales or how we should be depicting them. So among many other different things that we could name as part of that, there are the attacks on yachts in the Gibraltar Strait by killer whales that are bluefin tuna specialists. So many other kind of depictions on wildlife documentaries of behaviour that is sometimes disturbing, I would say. Nevertheless, we're still getting a lot of documentaries that are of kind of sea panda variety. I'll skip over this one. This is the one that was made here in Canada. But it seems to me that in some ways it's trying, that co-extinction documentary is trying to hold on to an idealized picture of killer whales that science and wildlife filmmaking is making seem, I think, quite difficult to sustain. So in the movie, as I said, they start out by reporting on the media response to the 17 days carrying the baby. This is what one of the voiceovers said. 17 days carrying her dead baby. Imagine what J35 is feeling, this grief, this loss. Ken Balcom is in that documentary too, and he describes killer whales as a society that's figured out how to live with others, and we haven't. One of the directors says that killer whales are apex predators, they're an indicator species, and in that way, it's almost like they're trying to tell us something. And at the end of the documentary, she says, when we talk about trying to save a species, really what we're talking about is trying to save us as well, our collective future, hence co-extinction. Few things to say about that. Remember what Huggins said about allegory? Well, here they are again, right? The killer whale, the fate of the southern resident killer whales isn't really about the southern resident killer whales. It's really a message for us. It's really about us. They're trying to tell us, apparently. They're trying to tell us what's wrong with the way we live and how we behave. It's almost like they're trying to tell us something. These lines are almost word for word what people were saying in the 1970s during the campaign to save the whales. It's like we can't really pay attention to whales in their own right. We have to just kind of constantly turn them into a screen for our own concerns. That's one version, right? That's the sort of sea panda version. But scientists are also finding, revealing a much more complex creature, more complex species. So Luke Rendell and Hal Whitehead's fantastic book, The Cultural Lives of Whales and Dolphins, tells us that killer whales that eat baleen whales often eat just the tongue and lips. And the Gerlache killer whales, when eating relatively tiny penguins, often discard all of the carcass except the preferred breast muscles. So what you have to imagine is a killer whale with no fingers and thumbs, right? You've got a penguin about this big relative to the killer whale, and they somehow flip it out of its skin and just eat its breast muscles. And apart from what an astonishing feat of dexterity that is, I think it also underscores the extent to which killer whales have dominion in the oceans. And that word dominion actually was given to me by a wildlife cinematographer who had just been filming killer whales off the coast of Australia, kidnapping and then killing a humpback whale calf, as they do to about 400 or 500 humpback whale calves every year. And he said, when you see them, you realize they have dominion in that space. They can, nearly every population, and this is one of the interesting questions that we're kind of trying to think about, is nearly every population has a hyper-specialized foraging technique and a hyper-specialized foraging object. So in the southern residents population's case, it is the Chinook salmon. And they will literally starve rather than eat pink salmon, for example, which, that's just me. They have specialized in shark liver, whale calf tongue, and an Antarctic population that eats Weddell seals, but not crab-eater seals. So when you see them spy hopping, and before swishing a seal off of an ice floe, they're checking if it's the right kind of seal. Because if it's not the right kind of seal, they won't bother. And it's not at all clear whether those foraging specializations have any sort of ecological basis whatsoever. They really do seem, and from a humanistic perspective, they look a lot like food taboos. And what anthropologists know about food taboos is that they happen, although we might be able to retrospectively try to apply some kind of rationale or logic to them, food taboos make no sense. That it's just a thing that human beings do, and as Rendell and Whitehead point out, one of the things about culture, in fact, perhaps the defining thing about culture, is that it can preserve stupid behaviours, right? Because they're transmitted by non-genetic means, right? So they also argue that it is very likely that killer whales have eradicated whole species, perhaps many species. So they argue that the reason there is, for the moment, taxonomically only one species of killer whale in the world is that perhaps they hyper-specialize, they develop more and more refined and effective hunting techniques, foraging techniques, and then potentially that puts them at risk of localized extinction of particular ecotypes when there's a change to their preferred prey type, right? They've gotten so good at killing it, they can no longer do anything else. As I say, cultural transmission preserves stupidity, also known as taboo. So, some of the other many things that killer whales have been observed doing, so fish-eating types that like to catch porpoises and bat them around with their tails until they're dead. And of course, those wonderful Gibraltar population that is attacking yachts and sinking yachts. It may be, I just think it's rather fascinating that this population, although this is a behavior that seems to be spreading through the population, the Spanish called the original one Gladys, and so now all the killer whales that attack yachts are also called Gladys. So this is proliferation of Gladyses in the Strait of Gibraltar. But this population is also well known, right? Their specialization is bluefin tuna. And besides attacking yachts, this population is also getting into trouble because they are colliding with the desire of Spanish fishermen to collect bluefin tuna. Whether there's any relationship between those two cultural developments, I don't know. But as a person interested in culture, I think there might well be. I'm not saying that means they are Che Guevara in disguise, but it's a good poster. So it seems to me that firstly we are at a moment of cultural instability in the way we represent and think about killer whales. Secondly, we're also at a moment of enormous technological opportunity in our capacity, scientists' capacity to observe and to learn about killer whales. So primarily through aerial drones, but also through rapid genomic sequencing, in the field biopsies. There are a load of really fantastic technologies that are enabling more illuminating hypotheses to be developed. And the Centre for Whale Research in San Juan Island has a 50-year archive that hasn't been digitized. So part of this project, we hope, will be digitizing that so that we can do retrospective, like secondary analysis on it. My colleague, my partner, Darren Croft, became pretty well known for a paper demonstrating the importance of matriarchal and postmenopausal females in killer whale in the southern resident population, and that was secondary analysis of the existing observational record. So you've got a moment of cultural opportunity, a moment of scientific opportunity, but my feeling is that what's missing from this is an ability to really think about killer whale culture culturally. So when scientists think about behavioral ecology, their framework is one of inclusive fitness, right? And behavioral ecology is pretty much defined by that objective, and fitness optimization. That is an incredibly powerful explanatory framework, but it is also, if you try to apply it to humans, it really wouldn't work very well. Because cultures don't fit well within an inclusive fitness model. And so what I want to try and do is see if, and I'm not convinced this can even be done, but maybe it can, see if ideas from the humanities, from anthropology and history and so on, could actually be turned into actionable hypotheses about killer whales. Because apart from anything else, the great majority of the research that has been done to date, this is changing now, but it's still predominantly the southern resident population. So if you were an anthropologist and you said, yeah, we've studied one tribe and we think all humans do much the same as them. Of course they don't. Of course we don't. And scientists know this perfectly well. It's just very, very hard to observe the other ones. So I think that the new technologies will enable a much broader comparative cultural sense of how killer whales behave, and kind of avoid that risk of extrapolating from one very well-known population and its behavior to all the others. At the same time, I think that there's an opportunity to think about how scientists write about and think about what is, I think, the only competitor species to ourselves that comes close in terms of its cultural capability. Really, killer whales are doing what we have started doing the last few 100,000 years, that is, being in a position of dominion on land, of terrestrial animals, and shaping the ecologies of every space we inhabit. Killer whales have been doing this for millions of years. And it seems to me that taking that seriously as culture, and the role of culture in that dominion, I think, is potentially a powerful thing to try and do. And as I say, we're in this moment of instability in literary popular cultures, so hence I'm working with a wildlife cinematographer to see if we can develop a new kind of nature documentary that might, come close to telling the truth about killer whales. And I just want to take a moment to just remember Sir David Attenborough, who passed away today, who is very...
What?
Yes,
What?
I know, I'm sorry, it's true. It is actually true, I'm not kidding, but so David Attenborough passed away today. I am a huge admirer of David Attenborough and of what he accomplished. But it's only fair to point out that his model of nature documentary is not, even without his death, it would not have been made yet. Because people are just not watching those kind of documentaries anymore. That model of just isn't this awesome and isn't this other thing awesome, especially without his magical voice to voice over it, it's just not, holding our attention. So we want to see if we can come up with a different, better way of representing the complexity of killer whales in a new way. Sorry, I brought you down about David Attenborough as well now, but that just came to my mind because I've been thinking about it. So also to try to take the research into a comparative space. If you're studying culture, it's hard to say anything sensible if you only study one. And so trying to bring research in the Salish Sea, in the Iceland, Norway space, and the Straits of Gibraltar into a partnership. And I'll just finish off by giving some ideas of what I hope might be humanistic ideas that we might be able to ask questions about that can be tested in wild killer whale populations. So here's one. Southern resident killer whales are starving rather than switching from depleted Chinook salmon to available alternatives. From a conservation perspective, it's obviously pretty important that that's our food. From a behavioural point of view, it doesn't make any difference, right? That it's revealing that their cultural conservatism and their xenophobia, which is defined by Rendell and Whitehead, they talk about the xenophobia of killer whale populations. That this is an endangering dimension of their social behaviour. Cultural conservatism is endangering this population and may well have endangered other populations without human beings' help in the past. So, is this a kind of cultural conservatism that we can recognise from human cultures, and is it true of all killer whale populations? Or do those ecotypes hyper-specialise more and more over time? So is that conservatism something that emerges, and is it something that can be generalised across populations? Sorry, what, you had a hand up?
Yeah, we don't have to talk about this now, but
yeah.
We searched it up, and I don't think David Attenborough has died.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God.
Where'd you find that? Where did you find it?
Okay, we'll look into it in a minute. All right. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That would be good news. Yay. So, thank you for checking. I've been carrying that around all day. We'll see. mean, he is 100 years old. So.
Greg, who told you? Who told
No,
you?
I saw it online this morning. I can't remember where it was.
Or on Twitter?
No, it was on a news site. It was on a news site. So.
Well, on The Onion?
No, I don't think it was.
What?
I'm alive! I'm not dead!
No, this isn't, it can't be right because it said he was 99. I found it on Reddit.
Okay,
Is he alive 2026? Yes, he's alive.
He's alive.
He's alive.
Okay, hooray! Attenborough is alive. However, the blue chip documentary format is not alive. So I have to say, they are not being commissioned anymore by BBC Earth. Here's another thought. So one of the things that anthropologists have noticed, found, is that human societies diverge and end up very different to one another, in part because people don't want to be like their neighbours. And because human society, I would argue that all ethnicities are ethnocentric and are xenophobic, to a degree. That those characteristics will create what Gregory Bateson calls schismogenesis, like the divergence over time of cultural divergence in order to amplify difference on purpose. And so in several parts of the world, there are sympatric orca populations with different prey specializations. Is there a role for something like schismogenesis, and is that something that you could observe? Certainly, you can observe aspects of xenophobia already. I'm also interested in the linguistic study of contact languages, so pidgins and creoles. Languages that emerge in contact between human cultures, and so you have a kind of not exactly natural experiment because captive orcas from different populations have been housed together. And some of their vocalizations seem to show contact zone features. And that might be, is there a way of defining those features as a signature that would be distinct from mere sort of accommodation because they're accommodating to each other because they're residing together. Not just convergence through proximity, but something like sort of creolization and its innovation. Is there any evidence for that? Because I guess part of what I'm trying to get at is anthropomorphism limits the kinds of hypotheses scientists think they can entertain. Right? So if you think that certain kinds of questions are by definition off limits, then you will be much less likely, I suggest, to go looking for them. That doesn't mean to say you're going to find anything very interesting, but by opening up the range of hypotheses about culture that you're prepared to entertain, there's a chance. Also, there's a lot of evidence of killer whale altruism, including a recent paper collecting evidence of altruism towards humans. And I'll give you another example in a minute of intraspecific altruism. Neo-Darwinism, sociobiology tells us that altruism, true altruism, ought to be regulated by characteristics of a group. Right? For a group to manifest altruism, there has to be some sort of regulation of altruism. Otherwise, the freeloaders will take over. Right? That's some standard game theory. Well, how, in that case, is altruism regulated? There's all kinds of theories and ideas that I find interesting about how human societies regulate altruism and maintain altruism amongst humans, and could some of those ideas be translated into looking at killer whale cultures? And as I say, finally, there's the representation piece. That one is just going to disappear. That I think we're at a moment where critique of representations are also like trying to develop new ones. So, develop new ways of communicating about killer whales that show some of the complexity and sophistication that I don't think gets through to the public very much. And so I just want to finish off with a wonderful example of what my co-PI, Darren Croft, has just published. This is very recent. And this is, again, with the southern resident population. It's an example of what drones can do It's also, I think, quite an amusing example of anthropomorphic anxiety because they came up with the amusing term allo-kelping for this. But what it actually is a killer whale stripping a piece of kelp to use as a loofah on another killer whale. So it is the first example of tool use demonstrated in a marine mammal. So I think that, as I say, we're getting more and more observations that contribute to a richer conception of killer whale cultures. And what I'm hoping is that those of us that specialize in the study of culture might be able to help out. And that's it.